Okay, everyone, settle in. Exams are just around the corner, so let's do a masterclass on a topic that is absolutely fundamental to Indian constitutional law, Article 12. If you can nail this concept, you've really built the foundation for understanding all of Part 3 of the Constitution. So let's jump right in.
At the end of the day, it all comes down to this one simple but incredibly important question. If your fundamental rights are violated, who can you actually sue? Who can you drag to court? The answer isn't just anybody. The Constitution gives us a very specific target, and it all starts with understanding what it means by the state.
So here's how we're going to break this down today. First, we'll talk about why Article 12 is so critical, why I call it the gateway. Then we'll decode the actual definition in the Constitution. After that, we'll get into the tricky part, the other authorities puzzle. We'll look at the tools the Supreme Court has given us, apply them to some real cases, and then I'll give you a final, rapid-fire briefing to get you ready for your exam.
I want you to think of Article 12 as the gatekeeper. It's like the bouncer standing at the door of Part 3 of the Constitution. Your fundamental rights, the very soul of our Constitution, are for the most part only enforceable against the state. If the entity that violated your right doesn't qualify as the state, your case probably won't even get through the door.
And yeah, it's really that simple, but it's also that profound. So for any of you thinking about litigation, remember this. The very first hurdle you have to cross in a fundamental rights case is proving that the body you're suing is the state under Article 12. It is literally the key that unlocks everything else.
Okay, so what does the Constitution actually say? Let's go directly to the source and look at the text itself. This is our raw material, and then we'll see how the courts have molded and shaped it over the years.
At first glance, it seems pretty clear, right? It lists the big players, the central government, the state governments, but then it gets a little vague. It says all local or other authorities. Now that little phrase, other authorities, let me tell you, that's what has spawned decades of debate, litigation, and some of the most important Supreme Court judgments in our history.
So, if you're taking notes, you can basically break the definition down into these 4 tidy components. The first 3 are super straightforward. Central government, state governments, and your local municipality. No one's really arguing about those. But it's this fourth one, this catch-all category of other authorities, that's the real mystery we have to solve.
This is where the real action is, legally speaking. And you might ask why. Well, think about it. As modern India grew, the government started acting through all sorts of new bodies, public sector corporations, statutory boards, universities, you name it. The framers of the Constitution didn't define other authorities, so it fell to the courts to figure out if these new bodies had to respect your fundamental rights.
And this led to the exact questions the judiciary had to grapple with. Is a massive government-owned company like the LIC, the Life Insurance Corporation, part of the state? What about a nationalized bank that the government owns? Or, here's a fun one, what about the BCCI, the Board of Control for Cricket in India? To answer all this, the Supreme Court had to create a toolkit.
So how did the court go about this? Well, they were smart. Instead of just making it up on a case-by-case basis, which would be chaotic, the Supreme Court developed a series of legal tests through landmark judgments. These tests created a consistent framework for everyone to use when trying to figure out what counts as an other authority.
And you can actually see this thinking evolve over time. It started way back in '67, where the court took a simple view. If a statutory body can make rules, it's probably the state. Then came the game changer in 1981, the famous Ajay Hasia case, which gave us the Instrumentality test. And finally in 2002, in Pradeep Kumar Biswas, the court fine-tuned that test even further.
Okay, everyone, pens out. If there is one slide you need to remember for your exams, it is this one. Ajay Hasia is the case you absolutely, positively must cite. Justice Bhagawati gave us this brilliant 6-point checklist. Now, a body doesn't need to check every single box, but these are all indicators that it's acting as an instrumentality or agency of the government. This is your toolkit.
But the story doesn't end there. Years later, in the Pradeep Kumar Biswas case, the Supreme Court came back and clarified everything. They said, look, those 6 factors from Ajay Hasia are helpful, but the real question, the most dominant test, is whether the government has deep and pervasive control. It's not just about money, it's about control over how the body actually functions.
All right, enough theory. Let's make this real. How does this toolkit actually work when you apply it to real-world organizations? Let's run through a few famous examples and see if the courts decided they were in or out when it comes to the definition of the state.
Let's play judge for a minute. What about huge public sector undertakings like LIC and ONG? Yes, absolutely. The court said they easily meet the instrumentality test. How about central universities or the IITs? Yes, again, they're statutory bodies with deep government control. What about a purely private company like Tata? No way, not even close, no government control. And the big one, the BCCI. The Supreme Court controversially said no, it's a private body, even though it performs a major public function.
Okay, class, let's bring it all home. Deep breath. If you forget everything else we've talked about, please remember what's on this next slide. This is your final briefing, the core concepts you need to walk into that exam hall with.
Let's run through this final checklist together. 1. Article 12 is the gateway to enforcing your rights. 2. You must cite Ajay Hasia and its 6-point test. 3. Remember that the modern decisive factor is deep and pervasive control from Pradeep Kumar Biswas. 4. Use clear examples in your answers. LIC is in, BCI is out. And finally, show some nuance. Note that the law is still evolving, especially when it comes to private bodies doing public jobs. And that brings me to my final thought, and a question for you all. In today's world, where private companies are delivering everything from our electricity to our education, is a definition of the state that's based on government control still good enough to protect our rights? That's the big question that the next generation of lawyers, and that means you, is going to have to answer. Okay, good luck with your exams.